Welcome, everyone. We would now like to welcome Jonny Huang. Please, Jonny Huang, correct me if I'm pronouncing your last name in the wrong way, and my apologies.
No, that's no problem. Thank you so much for introducing me.
Thank you. So, Mr. Huang is going to explain blockchain and Bitcoin. Jonny is a crypto enthusiast who works in London. You are pleased to not ask him questions on financial advice since he's not allowed to give it. Mr. Jonny, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that. So like you say, I think my plan today was just to give a little sort of base level overview of blockchain technology and why it's useful and why it's exciting, and then probably talk a little bit about Bitcoin as sort of the famous example of the instance where blockchain and distributed ledger technology has been implemented. And then I think I'll probably finish just a little bit by talking about NFTs, which I'm hoping people have heard of. They're really, really exciting at the moment. They've really percolated into pop culture and meme culture. And I've been looking into them a lot recently and see a really, really exciting future for them. So just to go back a little bit to what blockchain is, as the name implies, it's a chain of blocks, right? And you can kind of think about each block as like a lump of information. And the information that these blocks contain varies massively depending on the use case, but ultimately it's basically just a big bubble of data, of info. And ultimately, blockchain is really just the software, the database that's used for other purposes. So often blockchain is used interchangeably with cryptocurrency, which absolutely isn't the case. Blockchain is just the underlying infrastructure that cryptocurrency is built on. So blockchain was actually designed in the early 1990s, so the best part of 30 years ago, by researchers, I believe, in the United States, but it was really made famous post 2009 by Satoshi Nakamoto, who developed and made the Bitcoin network. And what's special about blockchain is various things, but at its core, it's more secure than sort of old school databases and ledger technology. And there are various ways that it achieves this security. One of the ways is by giving each block a sort of its own fingerprint, so a unique code that is correlated with that block. And each block, among with all the other different exciting information that you can put inside it, contains its own fingerprint, but also crucially, the fingerprint of the previous block in the chain. So I'm hoping that you can see there how that sort of creates this underlying well-ordered chain of blocks, which is why it's referred to as a chain. Of course, it's not a physical chain. And the result is that you can't change the information in an individual block, i.e. change a block,
Sorry
without...
for interrupting. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh, I'm really sorry. Is that okay? My camera is a little bit dodgy at the moment.
Not a problem.
But can you hear me okay?
Yeah, the voice is...
Okay, that's fantastic. But yeah, so the result of this sort of underlying technology is that you can't change one piece of information, one block, without breaking that chain, which means that you'd essentially have to overwrite, i.e. change the entire blockchain to change the information in that block. Now, on top of that, blockchains are what's called distributed. So you might have heard the term distributed ledger technology, which is sometimes used interchangeably with blockchain. So what that means is that instead of being managed by one single person or entity or business or bank or whatever it is, it's managed by, up to thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of what are called nodes. And that's basically central processing units, so computers that have agreed to help verify and prove and maintain that blockchain. So like I said, these nodes are responsible for all the changes that are made to the blockchain. Anybody that wants to change anything about it or add a block to the chain, that change has to be approved by all the nodes on the network, which means that if you wanted to hack a blockchain to change it illegally, instead of just having to hack one computer or access one single point, you would have to hack potentially thousands, if not tens, if not hundreds of thousands of computers on the network all at the same time, which is pretty much impossible. And that's really where the security of blockchain technology comes from. So now it's the case that some networks have more nodes than others, which obviously makes some blockchains more secure than others because you'd have to hack more computers to make a change. And there's a degree of trade-off there because the more nodes you have, the longer it takes to verify a change to that blockchain. You can think of it in the way that, if you had to go through 100 doors, it would take you longer than if you had to go through, say, 3 or 4 doors. So, often there's a trade-off between speed and security with the blockchains. And this is known as the the blockchain trilemma, which is probably not something to go into at the moment. But the next question that I usually get asked is, therefore, why would people give up their computing power to run nodes and help maintain a network? And there has to be some sort of incentive for them to do so. And the answer to that is mining. So, in exchange for helping to maintain and run a network and verify changes and transactions on that blockchain, often these nodes will get rewarded with a cryptocurrency. And that was really, that's why Bitcoin was made. It is an incentive for people to help run the Bitcoin network. So I thought so that was a sort of a base overview of blockchain technology. There's so much more to it that I could, but a lot of which I don't have a development background. I couldn't go into in great detail, but there's just it would take hours, if not days, if not weeks to talk about it in great depth. So I thought next I'd probably talk about Bitcoin because it's the most famous use of blockchain technology. If anybody's heard of any cryptocurrencies, they will have probably heard of Bitcoin, and they may well have heard of Dogecoin, which is one of the meme coins, which I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about. But Bitcoin was really a response to a problem, and that problem was middlemen. So traditionally, if I wanted to transact with someone, so imagine that I was NASA and you were Tesla or Elon Musk, and I wanted to buy a rocket off you for, say, $10 million, right? The idea is that I would give you the 10 million and you give me the rocket in return. But we're left with the question of who gives their side first. Do I give you the $10 million first, or do you give me the rocket first? Because then obviously, if you give me the rocket, how can you possibly know that I'll definitely give you all the money? And equally, if I give you the money, how can I confirm that you'll give me the rocket? So traditionally, you need a middleman, someone in between that we both trust, that will take the rocket and take the money. And then once, both sides have been verified, will then hand off the rocket and the money to both sides. So that's really where the middleman is. And obviously that's inefficient. That middleman is going to want some form of incentive, some money, some cut of all the proceeds, and so on and so forth. So Bitcoin was really created to allow trustless peer-to-peer transactions that don't need the use of a middleman. So if I wanted to send you a Bitcoin in exchange for something, I would submit that request to the Bitcoin network, to all of these nodes that are running Bitcoin. They would then verify that, for instance, I do actually have a Bitcoin that I can give you, and check that everything else is above board and nothing shady or wrong is going on. Once they've approved that, then they would add a block to the chain that would contain that information saying that I gave you a Bitcoin, and then technically speaking, you would then own that Bitcoin. And that's really how Bitcoin allows the cutting out of these middlemen, basically making for a more efficient financial system. So the next question that I often get asked there is, why has Bitcoin been so successful? Anybody that's looked at what Bitcoin has done has known that it's gone from, pennies to a few dollars to now suddenly we're looking at one Bitcoin being worth between $60,000 and $70,000, which is absolutely crazy when you consider that that's all happened in the space of about a decade, really. And the reason that Bitcoin has been so successful, to understand that, we really have to understand what Bitcoin's purpose is in comparison to other cryptocurrencies. So their purpose is to be a store of value. So, somewhere that you can park cash, park capital, and it's going to appreciate, or at the very least hold its value over time. And to understand this, it helps to look at a historical example of a store of value. And the example that I always use here is gold, right? It's been around for thousands and thousands of years. It's been used as a means of value for just about as long. And the reason that it's so valuable is scarcity, right? And that's the reason that, mud or grass or whatever else it is not used as a store of value, because it's not scarce. Anybody can gain access to it really very, very quickly. Now, the problem with gold is that the supply of it is not actually finite. There isn't a maximum amount of gold that we have access to. We could find a new mine that gives us loads of gold. An asteroid could hit the Earth that contains loads of gold, and suddenly the supply could go up massively, and therefore the value could go down of each individual piece of gold. So Bitcoin takes this and it makes it even better in a sense. So there are 21 million Bitcoin, and that is all there will ever be. Nobody could possibly manufacture more Bitcoin. If they did, then it wouldn't be Bitcoin. So already the supply of Bitcoin is already more finite, it's already got a set maximum in comparison to gold. But on top of that, it addresses some of the problems that gold faces. So one of those is transferability. So it's very, very difficult for me to send you gold. It's very, very dangerous for me to send it in the post. If you were in, say, Scotland and I was in South Africa, it would be very, very difficult for me to give you that gold. Now, obviously, being stored on the blockchain, I can transfer Bitcoin to you literally with the click of a button, just through the internet. So, there's an efficiency case there, but also in terms of divisibility, right? So gold is physical, it's difficult to break down, it's a precious metal at its core, whereas Bitcoin, something that I think confuses people sometimes is they think that they can't invest in Bitcoin because they can't afford to pay $60,000, $70,000 for a Bitcoin. But it solves this divisibility problem by breaking each Bitcoin down into a massive number of what are called Satoshis, or named after the founder, or sats. And these are tiny, tiny fractions of a percentage of a Bitcoin, which allows me to transfer you, $2, $3 worth of Bitcoin rather than having to send a whole one to you. So really, Bitcoin takes a successful storage of value case, i.e. gold, and improves upon it. So in my mind, that's why it's been so successful and will continue to be successful in the future. But before I move on, just to talk a little bit about what I see as a really, really exciting implementation of blockchain, I will just preface this by saying that in my mind, Bitcoin is very much the most boring cryptocurrency. Now, that's not to say that it's not great and fantastic and is very, very good at what it does. But what you find with other cryptocurrencies that you might have heard of, things like Ethereum and Solana, is they're able to do much more. Now, they're newer, they've been developed more recently, they've been developed as a response to some of the problems that, the original cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin have faced, but they do so much more. But I spoke about Bitcoin because it is the most famous one, and it's definitely a stepping stone to then understanding some of the more complex, blockchain networks that are in existence now. But before I stop, I would like to speak a little bit about NFTs. I don't know whether you guys have heard about them at all, but they've really started to seep into media, pop culture. Post Malone owns an NFT. Snoop Dogg owns NFTs. Like real celebrities, big names, all buying in on this craze. But I think it would probably help to understand just what an NFT is. So an NFT is basically an individual cryptocurrency or token. So what I mean by that is the sense that in the sense that one Bitcoin is one individual token or coin, an NFT is just the same in that it is one individual coin. So but this one cannot be broken down. So it has all the benefits that cryptocurrencies come with. So things like being stored immutably on the blockchain, being able to prove that you own that cryptocurrency, but also being able to transfer it very, very quickly, as we mentioned earlier. Now, NFT stands for non-fungible token. And what fungibility means is basically the idea that something is interchangeable. So going back to the Bitcoin example, if you had a Bitcoin and I had a Bitcoin, they're exactly the same. They're identical. So if we switched them, if in theory I gave you my Bitcoin and you gave me yours, nothing really would have changed over and above sort of the philosophical nature of it. But ultimately, we'd both just have one Bitcoin, right? Whereas an NFT, because they're unique, are considered to be non-fungible, i.e. they're not directly interchangeable with any other token. They're unique and they stand for something in that respect. And what that means is that an NFT basically amounts to a digital deed of ownership. So you can use an NFT to prove that you own pretty much anything. So the ones that we've seen a lot of are JPEGs and photos. So some of the most famous NFT collections are ones like the Bored Ape Yacht Club, which feature something like 10,000 basically pictures of cartoon monkeys. And these are going for, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And also CryptoPunks, literally just a little avatar, a little picture of a head and shoulders of this sort of pixelated avatar character design. And like I say, these are going for incredible sums of money, basically just because people want to use them to flex. People want to use them as their profile pictures on Twitter, on Instagram, basically just to prove that they have one in the way that you'd buy an expensive pair of shoes, or in an extreme sense, buy, a painting by Picasso. It has value because people say that it has value. Ultimately, there's no real use case, no real utility there. But that's really changing. So obviously that's very exciting in its own respect, but it's the future of NFTs and what can be done with them that I find particularly compelling and particularly exciting. So because an NFT is really just a deed of ownership, like I said, you can attribute that to just about anything. And we're already starting to see NFTs um, sort of penetrate different industries. So the example that I often use for a use case, a real life use case for NFTs, is the secondary market. So that's in contrast to the primary market, which is where when someone manufactures a good, a product, be it a pair of shoes, be it a car, they will sell it from the manufacturer on the primary market. Now, the problem with that traditional model is that often products are resold over and over again between, ordinary people, retail consumers. And obviously, the individual or the company that made that original product doesn't get any of the money when it's transacted afterwards. So you can think of, really rare trainers by Nike or Yeezys by Kanye and Adidas. These are sold hundreds, if not thousands of times on the secondary marketplace, generating millions of dollars in revenue. And none of this comes back to the original creator. But with NFTs, what you can do is when you create an NFT, you can bake into the data what's called a royalty fee, which means that whenever that product is then sold on the secondary marketplace and forever, a little bit of that money, a little bit of that revenue will go to the original producer. So we've already seen. So when you think of products that are often resold, one of the examples that comes to mind is tickets for concerts, for sporting events, and we're already starting to see NFTs get involved in that industry there. So the NFL, the National Football League in the US, that massive franchise, has already announced that it'll be developing tickets as NFTs, which means that whenever they're sold on the secondary marketplace, they'll receive some of the revenue. But it also means you can sort of bake in additional use cases into those tickets. So maybe instead of buying one ticket to one game, you buy an NFT that entitles you to go to, one game every year forever. Right. And suddenly what you can do with these tickets and these NFTs becomes much, much more exciting. Another example that I think is really cool and can really benefit people in a big way is the music industry. So I read a report a couple of days ago about how streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, they take the vast majority of the revenue generated from musicians' artwork, from their songs and their pieces, and it goes to them and to the agents and lots of different people in between, basically middlemen. But with NFTs and blockchain technology, it allows the artist, the original creator, to recapture that revenue for themselves and basically makes it much fairer. They're the ones that are, creating the music, doing all the work, and suddenly they're only getting maybe a quarter of the total money that comes from that. So with NFTs, it allows musicians and artists to take ownership of their own product, to sell it themselves, and to, reap the rewards of what that means in perpetuity, which is really, really exciting. Now, having said that, these are just two very, very small examples of the kind of things that NFTs can be implemented in. So like I said, because it's just a deed of ownership, there's no reason that you couldn't own a house via an NFT, you couldn't own a degree via an NFT, and so on and so forth. The possibilities are really, really endless. But that was just a sort of brief overview of what NFTs are and the kind of use cases that they can be used for. So that was really what I prepared in terms of talking, in terms of a brief overview of blockchain, Bitcoin, and NFTs. If there are any questions and stuff, I'd be really, really happy to do my best to answer them. Like I said, I don't have a technical background. I'm much more involved in the sort of blockchain, cryptocurrency journalism space, but I'll definitely do my best to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you, Mr. Huang, for sharing this information with us. We also have like two short questions from the audience that we'd like to address to you.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Yeah, thank you. The first one is, what is your opinion? When will we have the blockchain having the 50% of the world financial transactions?
Oh, so this is very, very difficult to speculate on. So that's really a question about mass adoption, right? And obviously, I'm really going for a career in blockchain and cryptocurrency. So I really believe that mass adoption and the point where everybody understands this stuff will certainly take place. But it's very, very difficult to speculate on as to when that will be, because there are so many factors that can influence it. So the coronavirus and the pandemic, obviously, are really, really terrible phenomenon and very, very difficult for a lot of people. But it really jump-started cryptocurrency and blockchain adoption, because suddenly people were at home with maybe sometimes a little bit of extra money that they weren't spending on holidays and meals out and so forth because they couldn't. And people really started to look into this stuff. And we saw, a massive boom in interest and adoption and understanding. So what I would say is that it will be exponential in the sense that once you really understand it, you want to talk to people about it, and it really starts to dominate your life. And, one question leads to another, and you really fall down this rabbit hole of trying to understand everything. I mean, I work full time in cryptocurrency and blockchain, and I still feel completely behind and out of the loop the entire time because things move so quickly. But what I would say is that I think in 10 years' time, it will uh, it will definitely be more ubiquitous across the population. We're already starting to see a lot of institutional interest. Governments are working on their own cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, which have various problems, but it already shows that it's very much on the radar of the establishment and institutions. And that's where education has to come from, I think, is what I would say to that.
Thank you for your answer. The next question is, how do you think that NFT will change the world of hospitality and tourism?
Oh, so that's a really, really interesting one. So that's an industry specific question for NFTs. What I would say there is that the ticket example is probably quite applicable there in the sense that you can own the rights to something. So it doesn't have to be the ownership of a physical object or a picture. It can be, you can own the right to do something like attend an event and so on and so forth. And that means that you could say, for instance, that you couldn't make a particular event, you couldn't make a particular hospitality event, then maybe you rent out your NFT to someone because you couldn't make that event yourself. So in terms of recapturing lost value, there might have been a time where that seat would have just been left empty. But because now it's very, very easy to transfer temporary ownership or, the rights associated with that NFT to another individual, that could certainly open up avenues of efficiency there. I was also looking at a project whose name I can't remember that basically wants to become the sort of Airbnb for blockchain. So, in terms of sharing revenue, in terms of proving ownership of properties, of rights, of cuts of fees associated with that, there's definitely a lot of scope to expand into that particular area. But really, what I would say to that is the advantages that NFTs could bring to hospitality and that particular industry are the same as the advantages that can be brought to all the other ones in that respect. In that anything where ownership is required, which is just about every industry, NFTs can prove ownership and transfer ownership much more efficiently.
Okay, thank you. So now that we understand blockchain a little better and its relationship to cryptocurrency, we would like to ask you one last question. What do you think is the next step in the evolution of this technology?
Oh, see, again, that's a really difficult question because the space moves so quickly. So what I would say is that I think metaverse projects are gaining a lot of traction at the moment. Maybe you're asking into the future, but in terms of the stuff that's really up and coming at the moment, certainly decentralized metaverse projects are interesting. Things like Decentraland, Sandbox, so on and so forth, Axie Infinity. They've been getting a lot of traction, and that's really, really been driven in some respects by the adoption of cryptocurrency by the gaming industry. So something like 3 billion people around the world play some form of video game. So really tapping into that market and that demographic, I think has had tremendous upside. But also a lot of the hype around, you guys must have seen that Facebook has changed its name to Meta officially because they're developing their own metaverse, their own virtual world. Now that's slightly different because theirs will be a centralized metaverse virtual world, which means they will own all the data and can sell the data themselves. Whereas a lot of the projects like Sandbox and Decentraland are decentralized and thereby based around, blockchain, cryptocurrency oriented communities. But I think in terms of the spaces that I think are most interesting to look into, metaverses is certainly one of them. What you find is that a lot of these projects that are gaining a lot of attention, things like Sandbox, their full version isn't even released. So the amount that they're being talked about and invested in by institutions at the moment is absolutely crazy when you think that, in some respects, the full game hasn't even come out. So I think in terms of areas to look into for interest's sake, metaverse, GameFi projects are particularly interesting. And obviously there's a huge degree of overlap with non-fungible tokens there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Huang. A special thank you goes to you for finding the time to join us from London.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you. It was an honor.